Hello and welcome back to the latest edition of the Morning Bulletin here on the Blood Red channel. I'm your host, Edward Kay. Joining me today is Emmet Gates, and we're going to start today by indulging in a few hypotheticals. It is the international break. There's not too much going on around the club. So we're going to talk about Chris Kamara has revealed that Jose Mourinho, who was speaking to him back in, would have been 2017, he signed for Liverpool, Van Dijk, so probably around 16, 17. Kamara is saying that he said to Mourinho he should get Van Dijk in, which was probably quite a good recommendation back when he was at United. And Mourinho basically turned back to him and said, I would, but this lot won't let me have the money, meaning the Glazers. Thankfully, FSG did stump up the money, and Virgil van Dijk became a Liverpool player. But Emma, how different could the last 6 years have been if this had gone the other way?
Yeah, exactly. Like it would have been Liverpool's entire history, over the last half decade would have been very, very different had Van Dijk not arrived. And it kind of makes you wonder who, Jurgen Klopp would have went for had Van Dijk ended up in Manchester instead of Liverpool. I mean, we could go down this rabbit hole for hours and hours, speculating on who Liverpool could have signed. But thankfully, he chose the red of Liverpool rather than the red of United. But I think it's funny that, Chris Kamara would. I bring this up and be, Mourinho's response to Kamara's not question, but advice in the sense that United have always spent throughout the Glazer era, in and around that time period, they broke the British transfer record to bring Paul Pogba back for 90 million. So it wasn't like, the Glazers were running a tight ship financially. Perhaps maybe Mourinho just spent too much and they were maybe just for him, reining in the spending a bit. But I mean, who knows? But yeah, I think it's Liverpool's history could have been very, very different had Van Dijk went to Manchester, not Liverpool.
Yeah, it was always an interesting one that when Mourinho was at United, because all the talk was he's frustrated because they're not backing him, and they never really seemed to slow down the spending. So I'm not sure about that. Maybe just not signing the players he wanted, like a Van Dijk. But it raises an interesting question, I think, because there's probably a few shouts you could go for, but I've got two names in mind when it comes down to if you take them out of that Liverpool side over the last 5-6 years. Do they win the Champions League? Do they win the Premier League? Van Dijk's one, and I think Alisson's probably the other for me. Where do you stand on that one?
I mean, yeah, they're pretty good choices to be fair. I think when you look at it, the season they signed Alisson in 2018. Van Dijk had arrived 6 months beforehand, and then they win the Champions League the following season. They win the Premier League the season after that. They reach another Champions League final. They're breaking, points totals, although not winning the league because City were just slightly out of reach in a couple of those seasons. So you do think in Liverpool's recent history, signing Alisson and signing Van Dijk were kind of perhaps the turning points from morphing Liverpool from a very good team into a world-class team. So, it's hard to argue against Alisson and Van Dijk being the most important signings, definitely of the latter part of the Klopp era, you would say. Although for me, I'd say Roberto Firmino was probably a very important signing too, but he wasn't necessarily a Klopp. He arrived just a few months before Klopp, which a lot of people kind of forget. But he's so associated with the Jurgen Klopp era. But yeah, it's hard to look past Van Dijk and Alisson, I would say, just because they shored up the defense. And even though Van Dijk, you would probably say, is kind of not at his peak anymore post injury, but Alisson definitely is still at his peak. One of the best in the world, if not the best, and he's going to continue to be that way. Barring major injury for another 4 or 5 years. Obviously, with goalkeepers, there's more longevity than outfield players. So I think, yeah, you're right. It's hard to look past Van Dijk and Alisson as the two pivotal signings that have kind of propelled Liverpool in this direction.
Yeah, Toby in the comments there agreeing that they were a real catalyst for the club. Huge investments. There's going to be some huge investments probably needed this summer, but just one more. So we'll stick on the Van Dijk thing for now. It sort of given the impression when we did sign him, obviously there was it was a bit of a saga really with Southampton. We got sort of done for tapping him up a bit, I think, and then left it for sort of 6 months, and then came back to him. Really gave the impression certainly that it was Van Dijk or nothing for the club, and it kind of seemed like it was Liverpool or nothing for him. There was a lot of other big clubs in for him, a lot of other interests. Is that how it came across to you as well, Emmett?
Yeah, I mean, definitely from the Liverpool perspective, you would say that it did seem like they were all in on Van Dijk or nothing. It kind of has shades of the Jude Bellingham situation now. It's like Bellingham or nothing. In 2017, 2018, it was either right Van Dijk or nothing. They tried to get him in that summer. It didn't happen, and then they were back from him in December or January once they got the Philippe Coutinho money. So it does seem that way. That is kind of that was their Liverpool's MO at the time. And it did seem for Van Dijk that once he had his mind made up, that was it. He was going to wait for Liverpool. And you just kind of think back to that Coutinho deal, and you just like it's Liverpool won that deal hands down 15 times over. When you think of sold Coutinho for exorbitant amount of money, reinvested it in Van Dijk, Alisson, and Liverpool have been. Liverpool were clearly the winners. Barcelona, probably, I know they're not, but they could have been still paying off Coutinho for years. And, the best thing that Coutinho did for Barcelona was scoring against them for Bayern Munich. Just that deal, it's head scratching even today, just how better Liverpool came out of that deal. And Liverpool got Van Dijk, Alisson, and almost, built a bit of a dynasty out of it. And the team became better. And yeah, I think from that deal, from that whole era, A, Liverpool came out better, and B, it did seem that Van Dijk wanted Liverpool and Liverpool wanted Van Dijk, and there was no other options for either party.
Yes, interesting when you bring up that Coutinho deal. It's an absolutely crazy one, that, because if you look at sort of the trajectory of both clubs since Barca sort of re-emerging at the moment, they're looking like they're going to win La Liga, obviously. Sadly, knocked out of the Europa League by United. But ever since then, not really won a right lot, not done much in Europe. Barcelona, obviously, knocked out by us very, very famously. Ever since that transfer, it sort of seems like Barcelona mortgaged their future on, Coutinho was a good player, but I don't think any Liverpool fan was thinking keep hold of him once we got such a ridiculous bid. And with what we've been able to do with it, I mean, it's one of the greatest transfers of all time from a Liverpool perspective. But we'll move on now to Liverpool loanee Tyler Morton. He's in the Championship at Blackburn. They are 5th at the moment, I believe, looking to make a real promotion push. But he's spoken about a bit of frustration for him. He's not really been riding the bench a lot over the last few months. Do you think these are sort of worrying signs for Tyler Morton's development? I think it's crazy to say this, but he is sort of 20 now. When you look at Stefan Bajcetic only 18, making waves in the first team, do you think it is worrying signs for Tyler Morton?
Yeah, I mean, I was like, when Tyler Morton, he made a fair few number of appearances for Liverpool last season in the first team. I was always impressed with him. And I was surprised that he was kind of sent on loan for another, for a season to Blackburn. Obviously, shades of Harvey Elliott. And obviously, the hope was that he could come back a better player. And he's played about 34 games. I think he started, if my stats are correct, he started 25, 26 games. But I think in the last maybe 2 months, he's kind of fallen down the pecking order. And the thing about it is that Blackburn have won 5 of the last 6. So it's going to be difficult for him to get back in the team. When yourself, Eddie, when a team's winning, if you're on the bench, it's hard to get a look in unless there's injuries or suspensions. If a team is winning, the manager generally likes to keep the same starting 11. So Morton might find it difficult to get back into the team in the next, 2 or 3 months that's left of the championship season. But yeah, I do think this, if it continues like this for the rest of the season, you would say it's maybe a bit of a backward step for him, considering that he was, starting some games for Liverpool's midfield last season, and now he can't get in the Blackburn team in a division lower. But I think that's the thing with the championship. It's one of those divisions where coaches value experience because they're all trying to get out of the Championship into the Premier League. And if it looks like a team is in a playoff push or push for promotion, they are inevitably going to edge towards experienced players in the division rather than, a 20, 21-year-old who doesn't really have that much experience of the division. So it's one of those things where you send players on loan. It may or may not work, not through any fault of the player, just because if they're very young, Blackburn really have no, duty to Liverpool to play him, to play Tyler Morton if they're going for a playoff push, unless it's written in the contract that he has to play. But if they're, third or fourth, fifth of the table and they're looking for promotion, they're probably going to go towards experience. The other end of the 20s or into the 30s as opposed to, a 20-year-old kid.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think it is sort of understandable from that Blackburn position, but obviously frustrating from a Liverpool point of view, having seen Harvey Elliott go there, come on leaps and bounds, and obviously come back and end up, I think he's still featured in every game for us this season in some capacity or another. Hopefully Tyler Morton can come back and do the same, really forge a career for himself at Liverpool. But that is all we're going to have time for here on the Morning Bulletin today. So, Emmett, thanks for joining me, and we'll catch you next time.